practices of yoga can indeed be helpful to people with food and body image challenges, people who struggle with overeating and undereating and kind of self-destructive behaviors, but they can also be a double-edged sword. And it's really important for yoga teachers who are working with this population to know that just as yoga can be healing and medicinal, it can also be a really sort of convenient disguise for masking over-exercising behaviors and masking the very same thing that this practice can be so helpful for.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm really fascinated with, and I try to sort of bring it into some of these interviews is sort of getting that we're in this grand experiment where we're taking these practices that have a particular sort of cultural and historical context that is also much more complex than we're often led to believe, right? We're led to believe there's just this one sort of text and there's this one tradition and lineage and that's the true yoga, but really there's this very diverse history and varied kind of philosophies and approaches to practicing both yoga and meditation and in the ways that we think about them. And the strain of yoga that is ascetic, that is about extreme control, that is about relating to the body actually in a fairly punitive way and trying to transcend your sort of baser animal instincts, so to speak. That's something that we see in all religious traditions, this idea that we're kind of at war with ourselves in order to be worthy of God's love or something like that, right? In order to transcend into pure spirit, you have to sort of dominate and control and self-flagellate, whip the body into submission. And there's a way that particular undercurrent of metaphysics and sort of a way of relating to ourselves has again a significant overlap with eating disorders and with other kinds of neuroses, right? Where if I can just control my body and control what I'm eating and become more pure. We see this a lot even in contemporary yoga in the US, where there's a lot of ideas about what kinds of foods are spiritual and how you're basically supposed to live every aspect of your life in order to be a good yogi. And a lot of that, I think, can feed into a kind of puritanical OCD, like a very overly controlling sort of pathology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for someone who has struggled with anorexia or, another thing that gets talked about a lot is orthorexia, so that sort of obsession with health or any variation on the spectrum of disordered eating of those two specific disorders. Coming to yoga is like, oh, yes, I have found my plan. I have found my practice.
Exactly.
I get to drink juice all day long, and I get encouraged by the community and doted upon for my self-discipline and self-control. This is my crew.
This community reflects my values, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to this community inadvertently actually supports my dysfunction. In fact, there's a significant sort of feature of yoga and a particular sort of approach to Hindu spirituality is this idea that there are certain enlightened gurus who never have to eat and they never have to drink and they live in this kind of elevated state where they're separate from the material world, and that this is sort of evidence of their divinity. And it's interesting to me in talking with people who have struggled with eating disorders that there's a similar kind of psychology going on there at times, right?
Yeah, and really, I think one of the things that saddens me about the state of many yoga communities, not the entire yoga community by any means, but many yoga communities, is the lack of self-reflection about those dynamics, and a concept that I call social virility. And I'm not quite sure if that's a actual term or if it's something I coined. I can't remember if I read it in a book or if
Sounds
it's just
good. I like it.
Yeah, but really, the fact that certain dynamics travel in groups and in communities. And while you and I have before and you know, can very easily talk about how nonsensical those ideas are, that, you know, fasting on juice for a week somehow makes you cleaner, or less toxified, and we can very easily kind of joke and poke fun at how those are just really nonsensical ideas. At least, you know, not grounded in any modern science.
Yeah, we can debunk them in pretty rigorous ways.
Easily. But for someone, I guess where I get really sad is I know many young women who find their way into yoga studios after trauma, and men as well, after really difficult experiences, whether it's you know, a sexual trauma, or someone who's just lost a loved one, or someone who's going through a divorce. They find their way to this practice sort of with that quiet and maybe even subconscious desire to heal. And in our community, often they're met with, you know, go on this yoga cleanse to fix all of your problems. And there's not a whole lot of self-reflection about these dynamics. You know, what is it in me that's so attracted to this idea that if I just drink juice for 5 days, I'll be better, more valuable? You know, what part of me feels so unclean that I grab onto the latest colon cleanse, or, you know, and I think that a little more self-reflection and a little bit more intelligent discernment could really benefit our community. You know, that too could be a dynamic.
Yeah, I agree with you. And if we're going to use the word spiritual, in a way, I would almost propose that that's sort of an aspect of a really healthy spiritual inquiry, is to ask the kinds of questions you were just asking, and to look at perhaps how, in our time and in the innovation and the integration and the grand experiment of what contemplative practice represents for us today, there's a profound shift toward embracing the body, practicing the kind of self-compassion that actually explores and investigates our psychological patterns, finding ways to exist in community and in relationship with one another and to ourselves that really are healing, as opposed to condemning or being puritanical.